This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you!
Boring. 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 Boring.
You got it. Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel. I'm not telling you. Because you're in no position to dictate that. Remember what you're doing. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
I call again for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages, the hostages.
Welcome, Lembit Öpik here on Lembit Öpik Live on Unprecedented TV, where we find the facts, kill the spin, and tell it like it is as best we can. A big thank you if you've already subscribed on our YouTube channel. If you haven't, it doesn't cost anything. Just go to Unprecedented TV, put my name in as well if you want, Lembit, Lembit. You get straight there and just press subscribe, and then you will get notifications and everything else. It helps us a lot, because as we expand the station, the more people who are subscribed, the more influence we have. It's a complicated algorithm thing, but you do help us a lot if you subscribe. Now, I want to talk about the ongoing meltdown of the Coalition of the Willing, or Coalition of the Witless, as people would say, over Ukraine. The story so far, Russia has made 3 demands. It made them since before the war began. It's still making those 3 demands, 1, 2, 3. And the West doesn't seem to be able to understand them. So the West makes lots of different demands, which are more or less the opposite to what Russia wants. We'll talk about these with my guest. Well, the upshot of it is Russia says, well, we'll carry on fighting. This is what we want, and we'll either get it peacefully or we'll get it militarily. The choice is yours. And apparently that logic is far too complicated for this coalition of the witless, and they carry on funneling money into Ukraine, where a significant proportion of it is stolen because it's a corrupt state. And the rest of it's used for killing Russians, but really killing Ukrainians, who are dying in droves. A far higher proportion of Ukrainians on the front are dying than Russians. Why? Because the Russians are a very, very hardened, professional military operation. And the Ukrainians are not. They've got people my age and older being conscripted and being sent to the front line. All of this, as you can guess from my tone, indicates that the killing fields of Ukraine will continue to retreat to Russian advantage until someone grows up on the Western side and tries to get peace. Could that person be Donald Trump? He seems to get it. He's just about the only Western leader who talks about the carnage. Meanwhile, we have the likes of Keir Starmer and his buddies talking about how they can help Ukraine win. Is that even feasible? Well, joining me today to talk about that is someone who calls it like it is, Marcus Papadopoulos. Marcus, good to see you. I recognize I took an overtly opinionated view there, but I, for one, am sick and tired of watching unquestioning nonsense on the mainstream media telling us that if Ukraine just gives it one more heave, they could turn things around.
Can I first of all say, Lembit, that I am always delighted to be on your show. Candid talk is imperative in the preservation of mankind, and causing offence never has been and never will be a crime. Turning to Ukraine, I would first of all like to start by citing an example of the deceitful nature of British mainstream media. So very recently, Putin in Moscow said, and I'm quoting him almost word for word, Russia has no intention to fight Europe. I have said that nearly 100 times. However, if Europe decides to attack us, then we are ready. End of quote. British mainstream media distorted what Putin said by running headlines saying, quote, Putin is ready for war with Europe, end quote. That demonstrates the deceitful, manipulative, and dangerous nature of British mainstream media. And I would say to the journalists who are putting their names to these articles to be very careful, because they are complicit in crimes against humanity, namely making the population in Britain anxious. Anxiety can lead to mental ill health. Mental ill health can result in suicide. And there is no defense in British law or in international law to the effect of, I am only following orders. That was established at the Nuremberg trials. And whilst I have criticisms of the Nuremberg trials, what I completely support is what was said there, that carrying out orders or following orders is no defense in law. So again, I would say to those British mainstream journalists to be very careful of what they are involving themselves in.
That's quite a big statement. What you're saying is it's the West that's contributing to danger for Western citizens on the basis that they're bigging up the prospect of a war which can only happen if Europe brings it on.
Yes, indeed. There will be no conventional war between NATO and Russia. Why? Because a conventional war between NATO and Russia would rapidly escalate into a nuclear war between America and Russia. Thus, there will be no war. But by British mainstream media alleging time after time that there is going to be a World War III, that is causing a lot of anxiety for many British people. And as I said, that causes mental ill health. That can result in suicide. That is a crime against humanity.
This is from The Independent. After Putin's chilling threat, is Europe ready for war with Russia? As Moscow becomes more bullish in its hybrid warfare tactics to provoke NATO, James C. Reynolds, I think this is from The Independent, looks at how both armies and economies compare. That's exactly what you're saying. Now, we could have chosen that from just about any newspaper. The assumption that Putin is threatening to attack us, just like you said. I'm Estonian, and Estonia has had its fair share of suffering under the boot of the Soviet Union. So maybe I have more reason to be concerned than others. I don't for a moment think that Russia has any intention of attacking the European Union. There's absolutely nothing in it for them.
If the British ruling elite, or indeed the Western ruling elites as a whole, have tangible evidence that Russia is planning to invade Eastern Europe or Central Europe or Western Europe or the whole of Europe, then present that evidence at the United Nations. But of course, they have no such evidence because Russia has no such intention. Yes, when it comes to Ukraine, there is a very powerful reason for why the Russians are in Ukraine and will never leave Ukraine. Yes, the Russians are very concerned about the growing NATO presence in the Baltic states, which is a violation of the Russia-NATO Treaty of 1997. And for Russia, the concern is this: the Kaliningrad enclave is separated from the rest of Russia, and the fear of the Kremlin is that NATO, using its navy, could attempt to blockade Kaliningrad and separate it from the rest of the Russian Federation. But aside from that, and aside from Ukraine, Russia has absolutely no interest in war. But again, as I said, if they have evidence, present it.
Now, this is back to that headline. This is typical of the reporting that you see in the mainstream media, on television, in the papers. And all of it presents Vladimir Putin as wanting to roll his tanks across Poland into Germany, suppose the United Kingdom. It's nonsense. I'd use much stronger language, but we have children watching. It's absolute balderdash. And the reason I think they do it is because we have a bunch of politicians so stupid that either they believe it themselves or they think that they can get us to believe it, both of which indicates limited intellectual capacity. But what really annoys me is this has practical implications. Mark Rutte, who's one of the strangest people I've ever seen in a political role, really odd. He makes me feel really uncomfortable, actually. He endlessly goes on about, oh, we need to put 5% of money into the defense, into all of this, well, I suppose, dangerous war games, I would say. And that's a huge amount of money. I cannot see. By the way, I don't think it's possible for the West to win against Russia. It's impossible. Either Russia wins or everyone loses. There's no scenario in which the West wins.
Well, first of all, the NATO chief, and I use chief in a very loose way, is merely a voice box. He reads from a script which has been prepared by others. He has no power whatsoever. NATO, like the European Union, is one of numerous weapons of the Western ruling elites or globalists. In regard to the British establishment constantly alleging that there is a threat to Europe, there is a threat to Britain from Russia. On the one hand, they say that to continue as a justification to continue sending vast amounts of British taxpayers' money to Ukraine in the hope of defeating the Russian army in Ukraine, which would then pave the way for Ukraine to join NATO. And on the other hand, they make that allegation, which, as I said, is completely unsubstantiated, as a way of trying to distract the British people from what is happening at home, starting with the forever rise of the cost of living, for how so many households in Britain are now living in poverty, how many children are living below the breadline, how crime is rampant across the United Kingdom, and effectively how Britain is dead. So they are trying to distract the British people. It is not working, but they will persist.
Well,
and they will keep on persisting because there is no democracy in the United Kingdom.
I want to come back to that. But in terms of Mark Rutte and his people, I've just got this feeling continuously that people like, there he is, people like him have no connection with what you've just described. You know, I listened to him saying things like lethal force is our best defense. It's totally Orwellian. Perpetual war, straight out of 1984. And I don't like him. I have not met him, but I don't like him because he comes across as this oddball, not very clubbable person who only understands in some sociopathic way some scant elements of militarism. But this man on the screen can't possibly believe, can he, that the West could possibly win a war against Russia. But everything he says is predicated on the assumption that it can.
All that we hear, Lembit, from the likes of Mark Rutte, Starmer and Macron is inversion at its most inverted. These people have been chosen to implement an agenda.
Yeah.
They are soulless. They have no empathy. There is no feelings in them whatsoever. They have been chosen for those reasons. Like Starmer, for example. People often say on social media how nice it would be at the next general election for Starmer to lose by a landslide. They do not understand the nature of Starmer. He cares nothing about losing an election. He has no integrity. He has no credibility. He has been chosen for a job. He has been chosen to implement an agenda, and all he cares about is receiving what he receives in terms of wealth and other things as a result of doing that. And in regard to the war in Ukraine, the last time I was on your show, Lembit, I said very clearly that nothing would come of the new peace plan for Ukraine, which started in America, then made its way to Europe, where it was seriously amended. Why did I say nothing would come of it? Because the Russians have said since the outset of their campaign and after the campaign began that it must be put into writing that never ever will Ukraine be admitted to NATO. Secondly, that Ukraine will be completely demilitarized. And thirdly, the ruling cabal in Kiev will be removed. Now, the peace plan that was presented recently to Putin in the Kremlin by Steve Witkoff said that NATO, that Ukrainian membership of NATO would effectively not be ruled out, and that Ukraine would be allowed to keep an army of 600,000, which is a very large force. But as I said, even 50,000 soldiers, the Kremlin has said it is against. Thus, there will be no peace. The outcome of the war in Europe will be decided on the battlefield. I think Trump would like a peaceful resolution. I think he has tried, but I think he's at the stage now, Lembit, where he's about to wash his hands off both Ukraine and Russia in the context of the war.
I was quite optimistic when they met. This picture, I think, taken in Alaska. I wonder what that man in the background's doing. I'm not sure he's supposed to be there, but who knows? And I was optimistic because we're looking at two adults there, and two deal makers. They're both pragmatists, and neither of them really has great motivation to continue a gratuitous war. But it seems to me that all these other people who are involved, we'll come back to this later, they got much more of a motivation to continue the war. Come back to you in a minute. I'm talking here on Lembit Öpik Live with Marcus Papadopoulos about the situation in Ukraine, whether there can be a peace or not. And Marcus is saying it's in a lot of people's interest to continue the war. Russia hasn't changed its demands, but the West wants them to. And so therefore we have an irresistible force against an immovable object, except that I don't think the West is irresistible. I think that they're losing momentum. We'll come back to that shortly. Tim Scott Uncancelled is alive and well and back on the screens. You can normally watch his live shows on Saturdays at 10 a.m. UK time. But go to the archive on Unprecedented TV. Go to the YouTube and you'll find his shows as well. Great chap, great program. Tim Scott Uncancelled from the Freedom Association there. And you can see his back catalogue of excellent shows as well. He usually looks at stories that you may have missed and some of the mainstream stories that you may have seen misrepresented on television as well. But back to Marcus Papadopoulos with me today here on Lembit Öpik Live. Story so far, you're saying that there really isn't any prospect of some peaceful negotiation or negotiated settlement for now. But I have to say it's horrendously bloodthirsty, this war. And I think what people seem to not be aware of is that Ukraine is losing all the time. And Warren Thornton, a regular contributor here on the show, on the station, he says that for every Russian that dies, 18 Ukrainians die. What's your take on that?
I would agree with that. The disproportionate nature of losses on the Ukrainian side compared to the Russian side is absolutely enormous. That is why there are very few young men in their 20s and in their 30s left in Ukraine who can be conscripted and sent to the front line. But of course, in Britain and in the rest of the Western world, there is neither a free nor independent media. So ordinary people in Britain and other Western countries are not being told the truth about the reality of the battlefield in Ukraine. They do not fully understand the gigantic losses, something perhaps now nearly 2 million losses the Ukrainian armed forces have incurred. And of that, perhaps over 1 million have been killed in action, and many more are missing in action. So unfortunately, that is a reflection of living in a country, Britain, which is not a democracy, regardless of what puppets like Starmer or Lammy or Cooper or Reeves have to say. There is not a free or independent media in Britain, so Britons are not being told the truth. And that is not just dangerous, but it demonstrates how Britain has some years ago slipped into a tyranny and a kleptocracy.
In the meantime, we're supporting this carnage, and a lot of this footage, I think, emanates from Russian sources, but I have no reason to doubt its veracity, its authenticity. And these are just killing fields. If you've been conscripted against your will, you're 63 years old, you get 2 weeks training, and you're coming up against a battle-hardened military fighting force like Russia, you haven't got a chance.
No, they haven't. Or people who know nothing about military affairs take to social media and say, well, if the Russian armed forces is a superpower, then why have they not advanced already all the way to Kiev and captured Kiev? Well, there are two reasons for that. Firstly, NATO has saturated Ukraine with military hardware. Secondly, the Ukrainian government, which is a puppet of the globalists, is throwing man, woman, child into this carnage. Indeed, even Ukrainian men who suffer from, for example, Down syndrome have been seen on the front line, which is a horrific crime against humanity, a horrific war crime. And thirdly, the Russian armed forces, the Kremlin, Russia as a whole, perceives the people in Ukraine, not the people in Eastern Galicia, Ternopil, Lvov, and Ivano-Frankivsk, but in the rest of Ukraine, as being part of the Russian world. So that is why they are taking great steps to avert casualties, which means another reason as to why the Russian military is moving forward, albeit at a very slow pace. So again, if people really want to understand the situation on the battlefield, they need to acquaint themselves with Russian history, and they also need to acquaint themselves with the Russian strategy. They need to stop turning to these imbeciles on Sky News and BBC News and Channel 4 News, and these imbeciles who are writing columns in The Guardian and The Telegraph, because these people know nothing about military affairs. And even if they have military ranks, they've only been given those ranks because they are yes people. They write those pieces for money, and they are rewarded handsomely for writing those pieces.
Meanwhile, Russia relentlessly goes forward. This is a rough indication of what many people think Russia needs or wants. Those 4 bits of Ukraine, there's a kind of buffer zone. I think it's worth saying again, I get criticized for being pro-Russia. I'm actually pro-truth. But it's worth saying again, what Russia's trying to do here is protect itself against NATO and against an encirclement of the whole of Russia by NATO. So you don't have to be a genius to understand that the 3 demands are consistently made, because then they need these things. Denazification of Ukraine, which shouldn't be a problem. People say Ukraine isn't Nazified, so what's the problem there? Agreeing with that. Secondly, demilitarization of Ukraine. As you say, Russia doesn't want to have that problem on its doorstep. And thirdly, no NATO membership. Now, the third one should be easy as well, because James Baker, on behalf of America in 1990, quite clearly said, not 1 inch to the east. That's his quote. So the only sticking point really is the military. But we know that even with the vast resources that Ukraine has had, they can't beat Russia. So what's the point of having a military, which just means you're going to kill people and lose territory?
Well, terms such as pro-Russia and genocide denier are vague terms, yet the more vague they are, the more dangerous they are, because you can apply it to more people. The reality is that for someone like myself, I hold a PhD in Russian history, which means that I have far more competence and experience to talk about Russia and the rest of the former Soviet Union than these morons on Sky News or BBC News, or who write for The Guardian. And I couldn't care less if these reporters have been based in Moscow or been based in Kiev. They do not know about Russian history. But then, Lembit, they don't need to know about Russian history. What they have been employed to do is to spread propaganda. That is all. Again, like Starmer, like Reeves, like Cooper, like Lammy, they have no integrity. They have no soul. They're simply in it for themselves. And in regard to NATO, NATO is not a peaceful military bloc. NATO is an expansionist and criminal military bloc. And I have said this so many times, Lembit, over the last 20 years or so. People need to understand that NATO's criminal nature did not begin with Libya. It didn't begin when America and Britain invaded Iraq. It began in 1999 when NATO launched an illegal, brutal, and unprovoked air assault against the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia in support of Albanian organized crime and Albanian terrorism. And parts of that air assault against the Serbs involved NATO dropping depleted uranium on Serbian towns and cities across the country, which has caused and continues to cause to this day massive levels of cancer. So that means everyone in NATO and all those journalists at the time in 1999 who were supporting NATO's war against the Serbian people are guilty of crimes against humanity.
The other thing you mentioned, nuclear depleted uranium, which is a kind of nuclear attack in a sense. It's worth remembering that Russia, if you really want to poke the bear, they also launched the biggest bomb ever. That was the biggest bomb, October 1961, ever detonated. It was called the Tsar bomb. And there was some speculation that the aircraft wouldn't get away. It was something like 55 megatons, phenomenally big. Russia still has this absolutely enormous nuclear arsenal. There's no prospect of the West ever defeating Russia militarily. And not just that. And by the way, I don't think that our idiot or a useful idiot or useless idiot Western politicians grasp that they're playing with fire here. The other thing they've managed to do, of course, is cause Russia, far from collapsing economically, to make great new friends. India. Recently, there was this visit by by Vladimir Putin, the head of Russia, to the head of India, which is the most populous country in the world, and they seem to be getting on pretty well. I have to say, one of the things that amused me recently was that with all of this "don't buy Russian oil" propaganda, Modi says, we'll buy as much as you got. we'll have limitless cheap oil from you. And that's the thing. What I think we're watching here, due to the mismanagement of the situation by the West, is the complete redrawing of the global hegemony, by which I mean, in simple terms, a shift of power from the West to the East and from the North to the South.
Well, first of all, Russia is the largest and most formidable nuclear power in the world. Secondly, in regard to India, historically, there has been only love felt by Indians for Russia. Why? Because following India's independence, the Soviet Union played a key role in developing an economic infrastructure in India. For example, the building of reservoirs. So from the Soviet period to the present day Russian period, Russia and India are exceptionally close friends and allies. And that Russia has recently secured a new enormous energy deal with India demonstrates the historic friendship between Delhi and Moscow. And it also demonstrates that Russia is not a pariah on the international stage. Let us remember that there are approximately 193 countries in the world. Of that, between 30 and 40 have placed sanctions on the Russian Federation. And those countries are almost exclusively in the Western world. But you know, Lembit, there's another point. What particularly angers me about the war in Ukraine is not only that it could have been averted, it is also because vast amounts of British taxpayers' money has been sent to Ukraine. A war which has nothing to do with Britain, has nothing to do with the British people, but has everything to do with the British ruling elite. And we saw recently Rachel Reeves deliver a budget. Well, of course, Rachel Reeves did not prepare that budget. Rachel Reeves couldn't budget for a picnic. Rachel Reeves would never be able to manage an economy. Instead, when she delivers a budget, she's reading from a prepared script. But that budget, which has been prepared for her, which was prepared for her by the heart of the British state, means even more misery for ordinary Britons. Terrible misery.
She was pretty miserable in this picture. A very extraordinary emotional outburst. There is no aspect of her performance that I find impressive. And you said, we better go to the last subject, which you've already raised, by the way. You've said this is all distraction tactics. And you hit the nail on the head as far as I'm concerned when you get the destruction of our justice system. David Lammy, who in 2020 said jury trials are fundamental to our democracy. We must protect them. And then 2025 he announces the dumping of jury trials for most criminal cases.
Yes.
When people as unintelligent as him, I don't know what his IQ is, but certainly not enough for his job. When people like as unintelligent as him are messing with the legal crown jewels of our justice system, it does give credence to your claim that wars abroad, rather the way George Orwell outlined them, wars abroad are good distractions.
This change, which the puppet Lammy recently introduced, whereby juries will be removed from some serious criminal cases, is part and parcel of the British state or the British ruling elite giving itself more and more power. We must remember that we are nearly in 2026, which means we are 4 years away from the 2030 agenda. And the British ruling elite, whilst it has been weakened because it has been exposed for its criminal, monstrous nature, is nonetheless sticking to its agenda. And that 2030 year is being uttered by all of the key elements which comprise the Western ruling elites. For example, Charles III. I will quickly tell you this, Lembit. recently I was in my local bank, and when I was in the queue, I saw a sign on the wall saying to customers, do not fret. All of our 600 or so banks will remain open until the very start of the year 2030.
No way.
Absolutely. Why is that year so important? Why are all the key elements which comprise globalism talking about 2030? Because that is the year that they intend to destroy what remains of Western civilization, what remains of freedoms in Western countries, and the year in which they intend to digitally enslave the entire population of the Western world.
That's a cheery place to finish. Thanks, Marcus. You always lift my spirits when I talk to you. It's all hopeless. Maybe not hopeless. I know that you've told me privately before, and I don't think it's a secret. You think that the only thing that can fix this is a revolution. But we might be so close to the totalitarianism predicted by George Orwell that even saying that could be accused. You could end up being accused of inciting some kind of violence and get imprisoned for saying it, even though it's just an observation.
Yes, indeed. But there is reason to be optimistic, because in the case of Britain, most Britons have now woken up, like most Americans have, like most French have, like most Swedes have. The Western ruling elites, the globalists, have been exposed. So there is reason for optimism. We must not surrender. I've always said this, Lembit. I would rather be dead and free than alive and a slave. And if we all adopt that mindset, then in simple English, game on.
Let's stop on that positive note. That is Marcus Papadopoulos pulling a positive out of what may have been regarded as rather dark analysis. You have your say as well. You can comment on my X, that's at Lembit Öpik, or you can get involved in the chat as well. Always welcome your views. You don't have to agree, you just have to think for yourself. Once again, we thank Marcus Papadopoulos, who really is genuinely qualified to talk about Russia, unlike, I think, anybody on the cabinet. And we also welcome him back in the future. If you got program ideas, then please share them, or go to the almost 600 shows we have on our archive now. That's not even all of them. Hopefully we're going to get some creative output pretty soon as well. Just entertainment, basically. I'm Lembit Öpik. That was Lembit Öpik Live. Take heart. There are still people who think for themselves, and you're one of them.
Immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages.